You are sitting in an office that smells of old paper and cheap tobacco. The year is 1942, and outside the window of this cramped administrative building in Vichy, France, the streets are quieter than they should be. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of absence, of people who were here yesterday and are gone today, leaving only the echo of their footsteps in your memory. Your name is not important, though history will remember it eventually. What matters now, in this moment, is the fountain pen in your hand and the blank identity card on your desk. The ink is still wet on the official stamp you have just pressed into the corner, the stamp that makes lies into truth, the stamp that turns the condemned into the saved. You are 31 years old, a social worker. Before the war, your greatest concerns were helping families navigate bureaucracy, securing food rations, finding housing for the displaced. Simple things, human things. Now you have become something else entirely. A forger, a criminal, a savior. The documents spread across your desk represent a mathematics of mortality that no one should ever have to calculate. Each signature you forge is a life. Each false address is a family. Each carefully altered birth certificate is a child who might see another spring. You have forged 2,500 documents, perhaps more. You stopped counting after the first 1,000 because the numbers became unbearable, because each one has a face you cannot forget. The light through the window is gray and weak, filtering through clouds that seem to have settled permanently over France like a shroud. Your hands do not shake anymore. They did at first, when you falsified your first identity papers for a Jewish family in Lyon, when you carefully changed the name Goldstein to Gautier, when you backdated a residence permit to make a refugee from Poland appear to be a lifelong citizen of Marseille. You had trembled so violently that the ink smeared, and you had to begin again. But repetition breeds a terrible kind of calm. Now your handwriting mimics the bureaucratic script of officials you have never met. Your signatures are perfect forgeries of men who would have you shot if they knew what you were doing in this small office where the heating barely works and the files stack higher each day. The Gestapo came through your building last week. You watched them walk past your door, boots on stone floors, that sound like death keeping time. They were looking for irregularities in the deportation lists, for families who had somehow slipped through the administrative machinery designed to catalog and eliminate them. You sat at this same desk, your heart a drum in your chest, surrounded by evidence of your crimes. False baptismal certificates, forged residency papers, identity cards with photographs that did not quite match the names typed beneath them. The door did not open. The boots continued down the hallway, and you exhaled, finally, after what felt like hours. But you knew they would return. They always return.
There is a photograph on your desk. Your own family, your wife, your 2 children. They do not know the extent of what you do. They cannot know. The knowledge itself is dangerous. It is a weight that could crush them, a secret that could swallow your entire family if even one word escapes at the wrong moment. You tell yourself this is why you continue, for them, so they can live in a world where such choices are not necessary.
But in the deepest hours of night, when you lie awake, listening to your wife's breathing beside you, you know the truth is more complicated. You continue because stopping would mean accepting that human beings can be reduced to numbers on lists, to stamps in ledgers, to categories that determine who lives and who vanishes into the east on trains that return empty. The wind outside sounds like weeping. You have learned to recognize them by their eyes. The ones who come to your office seeking help, they arrive with documents that are sometimes genuine, sometimes falsified by amateurs, sometimes nothing at all except the desperate hope that bureaucracy might somehow save them where humanity has failed. They sit across from you in the wooden chair that creaks under even the slightest weight, and they try to appear calm, composed, as if this is merely a routine administrative matter. But their eyes betray everything. The fear is always there, swimming just beneath the surface like something drowning in deep water. You have become an expert in reading this fear. You have become fluent in the language of desperation that no one should ever have to speak. There was a woman yesterday, Madame Levy. She did not give you her real name at first. She called herself Madame Laurent, and she presented papers that were obviously forged, amateurish work done by someone with good intentions but no skill. The birth date was wrong for the supposed place of birth. The stamp was slightly off-center. The photograph had been clumsily attached with glue that was already yellowing at the edges. You looked at these papers for a long moment, and then you looked at her. She was perhaps 40, though the war has a way of adding years to faces, carving lines of worry so deep they seem permanent. Behind her stood 2 children, a boy of maybe 8, a girl no older than 5. They were silent in the way children become silent when they have learned that making noise brings danger.
You did not tell her the documents were inadequate. You did not explain that these papers would be examined at the first checkpoint, that any German officer or French policeman with half a day's training would spot the forgery immediately. Instead, you asked her to wait. You told her there were complications with her file, administrative irregularities that needed to be resolved. Could she return in 3 hours? And when she left, clutching her children's hands with a grip that was probably too tight, you began the real work. You pulled fresh documents from the locked drawer where you keep the stolen forms. Official papers, blank and waiting. The good paper, heavy and textured, with the watermarks that cannot be replicated. The stamps you have carefully lifted from genuine documents and reproduced with a precision that would make a master craftsman weep. 3 hours to create a new identity. 3 hours to transform Levy into Laurent with a completeness that would survive scrutiny. You changed not just the name, but the entire history. A new place of birth in a village small enough that records were kept poorly. A new profession for the husband who was probably already dead, though she would not speak of it. Baptismal certificates that placed the family firmly within the Catholic tradition. You forged the signature of a priest who exists, who serves in a church you have never visited, whose handwriting you have memorized from a dozen other documents. The priest himself is sympathetic to your work, though you have never met him, though this collaboration happens only through the medium of his unwitting signature on papers he will never see. The forgery must be perfect, not good, perfect, because imperfection means discovery, and discovery means deportation, and deportation means the camps in the East that everyone whispers about,
but no one fully understands. You have heard rumors, stories that seem too horrible to believe, too systematic in their evil to be the work of human hands. Trains packed with thousands, heading to places with names like Auschwitz and Treblinka, places from which no letters return, places that exist in the geography of nightmare. You do not know if these stories are true, not entirely, but you know enough. You know that the families who are taken do not come back. You know that the children you save today might be corpses tomorrow if your work is not flawless. When Madame Levy returned, you handed her the new documents. You explained each one, showed her the details she would need to memorize, made her rehearse the story of her new life until it flowed naturally from her lips. The village where she was supposedly born, the date of her wedding, the name of the priest who baptized her children. She wept silently as you spoke, tears running down her face without sound, and you pretended not to notice because acknowledgement would have broken something fragile in both of you. She tried to pay you. You refused. Money makes it a transaction, and transactions leave records, and records are the architecture of death in this new world, where every pen stroke might be examined by men looking for excuses to kill. When she left with her children as the evening fell, you watched them disappear into the gray streets. You will never know if your work saved them. You will never know if they made it through the checkpoints, if they found shelter, if they survived. And this not knowing is its own kind of torture, this endless uncertainty that follows every document you forge. The silence in your office is absolute. Outside, somewhere, a train whistle sounds. The wind carries the smoke from distant chimneys. And tomorrow, there will be others. There are always others.
You have developed rituals to keep yourself sane, small routines that anchor you to something resembling normalcy in a world that has abandoned all pretense of reason. Each morning, you arrive at the office exactly at 8. You make coffee on the small burner in the corner, weak coffee from grounds that have been reused too many times, but the act itself is what matters. The pouring, the waiting, the first bitter sip that tells you this is another day, another chance to steal lives back from the machinery of extermination. You straighten the papers on your desk in the same order every time, official forms on the left, blank identity cards in the center drawer, the stamp, your most precious possession, hidden in a compartment you carved yourself into the underside of the desk. If they find the stamp, everything ends, not just for you, for everyone whose papers bear its impression.
By the third day, you have completed 16 of the 17 documents. The last one fights you. The photograph is slightly out of focus, making it difficult to match convincingly with the physical description you must type onto the identity card. You work through the afternoon, through the evening, until your hands are shaking so badly that you must stop every few minutes to steady them. When you finally finish, when the last signature dries on the last paper, you sit in the darkness of your office and feel nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, just a vast emptiness that might be exhaustion or might be the slow erosion of whatever part of you used to feel human emotions other than fear. The man returns. You give him the documents. He does not thank you. Gratitude is too dangerous, too close to acknowledgement of what has passed between you. He simply takes the papers, nods once, and disappears into the night. You will never know the names of the children. You will never know if your forgeries saved them, or if some small imperfection, some microscopic flaw led them to the trains heading east. You will carry these 17 possibilities with you forever, adding them to the thousands of other possibilities that populate your sleepless nights like ghosts waiting to tell you whether you succeeded or failed in the only task that matters. The office is cold. Outside, it has begun to rain.
You receive the news on a Thursday morning in late autumn. The trees outside have surrendered their leaves, and the branches claw at the sky like skeletal fingers reaching for something that will never come. A courier arrives, not one of your usual contacts, but a boy, perhaps 14, too young to fully understand the weight of the message he carries. He hands you a folded piece of paper, refuses to meet your eyes, and leaves before you can ask questions. The paper is thin, cheap, the kind used for messages that must be destroyed immediately after reading. The words are brief, written in a hand you recognize. The farmhouse. They found them, all taken. 17 children. The ones you had forged documents for just 6 weeks ago. The ones you had worked 3 sleepless days to save. Gone. The word sits in your mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of nausea through your entire body. You read the message again, hoping you have misunderstood, hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less final. But French is a precise language, and these words permit no other interpretation. Tout pris, all taken. You burn the paper in the ashtray on your desk, watching it curl and blacken, watching the evidence of your failure turn to ash. The smoke rises in a thin line toward the ceiling, and you think absurdly about chimneys, about smoke, about the rumors from the East that speak of crematoriums working day and night. The failure haunts you in ways the successes never could. You do not know what went wrong. Perhaps the documents were discovered during a random inspection. Perhaps someone informed on the farmer, motivated by fear or greed, or the simple human capacity for cruelty that this war has revealed, like a wound stripped of its bandage. Or perhaps your forgeries were flawed after all. Perhaps that small hesitation you felt when signing the last document, that moment of doubt, manifested somehow in the paper itself. Perhaps the SS officer who examined the papers saw something you missed, some microscopic imperfection that your exhausted eyes could not detect. You continue working. What else is there to do? Stopping would mean surrender, would mean accepting that the 17 children died for nothing, that their deaths close a door rather than opening one. So you forge more documents, 20 the next week, 35 the week after that. The numbers climb higher because the need grows more desperate with each passing month. The deportations have accelerated. The trains leave more frequently now, packed tighter, heading east with a regularity that suggests industrial efficiency rather than military necessity. This is not the chaos of war. This is something else, something organized and methodical, and so thoroughly evil that your mind refuses to fully comprehend it, even as your hands work to resist it.
Your wife knows now. You did not tell her. She discovered the truth herself, finding documents hidden in your coat pocket one evening when you came home too tired to remember to conceal them. She sat at the kitchen table with the false identity card spread before her, and she did not speak for a long time. When she finally looked at you, her face held an expression you could not read. Fear, certainly, but also something else. Pride, perhaps, or grief for the man she married, who has become someone else entirely, someone who carries the weight of thousands of lives in his briefcase and cannot sleep without seeing the faces of those he failed to save. She asked you to stop. She begged you, actually, which was unlike her because she has always been the stronger one, the one who faces difficulty without flinching. But this was different. This was not difficulty. This was watching the person you love walk deliberately toward destruction, knowing that each document you forge brings you closer to discovery. Each signature you fake adds another day to the sentence you will receive if they catch you. She reminded you of your children, your son who is 12 and asking questions you cannot answer honestly, your daughter who is 9 and still believes the world is essentially good. What happens to them, she asked, when you are arrested, when the Gestapo comes to our door and takes you away? What happens to all of us? You had no answer that would satisfy her. You told her you would be careful, which was a lie. Careful is impossible in this work. You told her you would stop soon, which was also a lie, because you know you cannot stop as long as there are people who need to save. You held her while she wept, feeling the tremors in her shoulders, and you understood that you were asking her to be complicit in your martyrdom, that by continuing this work, you were not only risking yourself, but sacrificing your family's safety for the lives of strangers. And yet, how do you explain to someone you love that stopping feels like murder, that each document you choose not to forge represents a person you have consciously decided to let die?
The impossible choice sits before you every morning. Your family or the others, safety or conscience, survival or humanity. There is no correct answer. There is only the pen in your hand and the blank documents waiting to be filled, and the knowledge that whatever you choose, someone will pay the price. The rain continues outside. Your office grows colder as winter approaches, and still you write. Still you forge, still you sign names that are not yours onto papers that transform the condemned into the saved, knowing that each signature might be the one that destroys everything, knowing that stopping is impossible because stopping would mean becoming the kind of person who could live in a world where children are loaded onto trains like cargo and shipped east to disappear into smoke. You think about the 17 often, especially at night, in the hours when sleep refuses to come. You wonder if they suffered. You wonder if they called for parents who were already dead. You wonder if your documents gave them even a few weeks of something resembling childhood before the end. And you wonder, though you try not to, whether saving 2,000 others makes up for the 17 you failed. Whether there is some cosmic mathematics that balances these scales. Whether redemption is even possible in a world that has gone so completely mad. The pen is heavy in your hand. Outside, the wind carries the sounds of trains.
You will survive the war. This is not something you know as you sit in your office in 1943, forging your 3,000th document, then your 4,000th. each one a small act of defiance against a machinery designed to eliminate human beings as efficiently as possible. You do not know that liberation will come, that Allied forces will push through France, that the camps in the East will be opened and their horrors finally, irrevocably exposed to a world that should have believed the rumors long before. You do not know that you will live to see your children grow, to hold grandchildren, to stand in a quiet cemetery decades later and place stones on graves that bear names you forged in the desperate hours of occupation. You only know the present moment, the pen, the paper, the signature that must be perfect, because perfection is the difference between breathing and ash. The liberation, when it comes in 1944, does not feel like victory. You are arrested briefly by the Free French forces. There is confusion about your role, questions about the forged documents, suspicion that you might have been collaborating with the enemy rather than resisting them. The irony is so bitter you almost laugh. Almost. But then the witnesses come forward, the families you saved, the children, now teenagers, who survived because you changed their names, the priest whose signature you forged, who testifies that he would have signed every document himself if asked, that your forgeries carried his blessing, even if not his hand. The charges are dropped, you are released, and you go home to a world that has ended and begun again simultaneously. A world where the trains no longer run east, but the smoke from the camps still hangs in the collective memory like a stain that will never wash clean. The numbers are counted later, after the liberation, after the archives are opened and historians begin their careful accounting of atrocity. 6 million Jews murdered. 6 million. The number is so vast it loses meaning, becomes abstract, a statistic too large for human comprehension. But you do not think in millions, you think in individuals. The woman with 2 children whose documents you forged on a Tuesday, the old man who wept silently in your office while you created a new identity for him, the 17 children from the farmhouse who you failed to save, whose faces visit you in dreams decades after the war has ended. These are the numbers that matter to you, not the 6 million, but the 2,500 you saved, and the unknown thousands you could not reach, the ones who never made it to your office, the ones whose names were already on lists before you learned to forge signatures. You live for many years after the war. You return to social work, to the mundane bureaucracy of helping people navigate housing applications and food subsidies and the 1,000 small cruelties of poverty in peacetime. Your hands, which once forged documents with such precision, shake now with age, with palsy, with the accumulated weight of all those signatures. You are honored eventually, given medals and recognition, invited to speak to students about resistance and courage and the power of individual action against systematic evil. You accept these honors with discomfort because you do not feel heroic. You feel like someone who did what was necessary, what was obvious, what any decent person should have done when faced with the choice between complicity and action. The question that haunts you until the end is not whether you did enough. You know you could never have done enough, that no single person could have stood against the machinery of genocide and stopped it entirely. The question is simpler and more terrible. Why were there not more like you? Why, in a nation of millions, did so few choose to resist? Why did most people choose safety over strangers, survival over conscience? You do not have an answer. You only have the memory of your office, the smell of ink and paper, the weight of the stamp in your hand, the knowledge that each document was a thread connecting you to someone who lived because you refused to accept that bureaucracy must serve evil simply because evil commands it. The world has moved on. The war is history now, studied in classrooms, reduced to timelines and statistics and grainy photographs that cannot capture the terror or the desperation or the small acts of decency that persisted even in the darkest hours. Young people look at images of the camps and ask how such things were possible, how entire societies could participate in or ignore systematic murder. And you want to tell them that it begins with small compromises, with looking away, with accepting that some lives matter less than others, with believing that one person cannot make a difference, so why bother trying? You want to tell them that the distance between civilization and atrocity is shorter than anyone wants to believe, that it can be crossed in a single generation, in a single election, in the time it takes for good people to decide that protecting themselves is more important than protecting others. But you also want to tell them this, that one person can make a difference, that 2,500 lives were saved not by armies or governments, but by a single social worker with access to blank identity cards and the courage to use them, that each signature you forged was an act of faith in the possibility of goodness, a refusal to accept that the world had been permanently reshaped into something monstrous, that the 17 you failed to save do not negate the thousands you succeeded in saving, even though you carry them with you always, even though their absence weighs as heavily as the presence of those who survived. Your story is not unique. There were others, people whose names history may never record, who forged documents or hid families or smuggled children across borders or simply said no when saying yes would have been easier and safer. The math of resistance is never simple. For every person saved, countless others were lost. For every act of courage, 1,000 acts of cowardice or indifference. But the acts of courage matter. They matter because they prove that choice existed even when it seemed there was no choice. That humanity persisted even when the world had organized itself around the principle of inhumanity. That the pen could be mightier than the sword when wielded by someone who understood that paperwork is not neutral. That bureaucracy can be weaponized for good as easily as for evil. The silence now is different from the silence of those years. This is the silence of memory, of contemplation, of understanding that history is not something that happened to other people in other times, but something that lives in the choices we make every day. The choice to see or to look away, to act or to wait for someone else to act, to believe that our individual actions matter or to surrender to the comfort of insignificance. If this story has moved you, if you want to explore more quiet histories about ordinary people who faced impossible choices in extraordinary times, subscribe to this channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because these stories matter, not as entertainment, but as warning and as inspiration, as evidence that we are all, always, one decision away from complicity or courage. The pen is in your hand, the paper waits. What will you write? The rain has stopped, the office is empty, but somewhere, someone is making the choice you made, and maybe, just maybe, they will choose to forge the document, to take the risk, to save the life, because you did, because someone must, because the alternative is unthinkable, and because in the end we are all responsible for the signatures we leave on the world.